announcement.
Facing charges of insider trading, Kassar turned over the $81,000 profit he had made selling the stock. A few months later, he resigned from Atari.
The SEC later cleared him of any wrongdoing.
But the damage was done. Atari lost $350 million and laid off 3,000 employees. And as Atari crashed, so did the entire industry. Mattel, the maker of Intellivision, faced a deficit of $200 million. Coleco was on the verge of bankruptcy. On the coin-op side, Bally Midway saw its profits slide by 85%.
We had this hit product called the Atari VCS. It made billions of dollars. It was a great product, obviously, but it was going to end. Eventually, it petered out. I think every game that could have been made for Atari was made.
And not all of them were hits.
There were a tremendous amount of bad games being made. There were also some very good games being made. But when the market is flooded with an inferior product, you can only burn people so many times.
According to legend, and very well verified legend, Atari took millions of games that just they could not sell. They put them on some trucks, they drove them out into New Mexico, they dumped them in the desert.
With Atari's 18-wheeler funeral procession, the golden age of video games was laid to rest. There were no survivors. Or so it seemed.
Coming up, it's Mario to the rescue.
It had vibrant colors, it had distinct images. Mario looked like a person, he didn't look like a stick figure.
How an unassuming plumber saved the video game industry. Next, as Game On continues. Now, back to Game On.
By 1985, video games were history. But at the Consumer Electronics Show that year, tucked away in a small booth, was the company that brought the world Donkey Kong, Nintendo. The Japanese game maker was exhibiting its latest product, the Famicom, a video game console. The video game business may have died in America, but it was alive and well in Japan. In fact, Nintendo had sold 3 million Famicoms there. Still, that didn't matter much stateside.
All of the buyers thought, you know, this is really slick, really neat, but they would not touch it, even if we guaranteed the sale. They said it was simply too risky.
Not wanting to scare off any more American retailers than it already had, the company stopped calling the Famicom a video game machine and renamed it the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. For good measure, they also added a decoy.
We came up with a robot so that we could tell buyers, and they in turn could tell their superiors, that this was not just a video game system, it was a robotic video game system or some nonsense like that. And it worked.
What didn't work for Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi were the test market plans.
We as Americans were saying, well, you know, you go to some place like Peoria or wherever they test market products. And he thought that was crazy. He said, I'll give you one chance. You got one shot. You try to introduce this in New York City, and if you can make it work there, then we'll go from there.
During Christmas 1985, Nintendo sold 50,000 units in New York, enough to prove that there was still a market in America for video games. And what really helped sell the NES was the video game included with it, a home version of Nintendo's Japanese arcade blockbuster, Super Mario Brothers.
If you saw Super Mario Brothers on the NES, it didn't look a thing like anything you saw on an old Atari machine. It looked like the arcade game. It had vibrant colors. It had distinct images. Mario looked like a person. He didn't look like a stick figure. You saw clouds and mushrooms and creatures.
It all paid off. In a poll taken a year later, kids across the country were asked what they wanted most for Christmas. Their number one choice, the NES. By 1988, Nintendo had a whopping 90% share of the video game market. The company's domination of the industry got even bigger when it introduced its video game equivalent of Sony's Walkman. And Nintendo had none other to thank for its success than Mikhail Gorbachev. Well, sort of. Right at the end of the Cold War, a Soviet computer engineer named Alexei Pajitnov created a puzzle game called Tetris. When the Iron Curtain lifted, Nintendo got its first look at Tetris and started talking rubles.
And we knew that that could be the killer game on Game Boy, the launch title.
Even with that tiny monochrome screen on a Game Boy, you could show the blocks very efficiently for Tetris. You could distinguish, the shapes and everything, and it was perfect. It was the perfect coupling.
Thanks to Tetris, Game Boy became an instant hit, selling 32 million units in its first 3 years. Nintendo seemed unbeatable.
There is a new addiction in America. Nintendo video games, more than a pastime, more than a passing fancy. For many, a kind of narcotic.
But at that very moment in time, Nintendo's days as the only game in town were numbered.
The new generation of kids were ready to play games again. Those who had played wanted to come back in. Sega saw this and said, there's room for more than one player in the market. If Nintendo can do it, Sega can do it.
A veteran executive of Coleco, Mattel, and Atari, Michael Katz became president of Sega's American division in 1989, just as the company was about to roll out the Genesis game console to replace its unsuccessful Master System.
When I joined Sega, I was told that the only Japanese I would be expected to know was the phrase Yakumandai. And I said, that's interesting. What does it mean? And I was told it meant 1 million units. So that became my marching orders. That became the prayer that I was supposed to give every morning when I woke up and every evening when I went to sleep.
Genesis puts you in the game with the...
To help answer his prayers, Katz went after athletes like Joe Montana to star in games for the Genesis. And he initiated a no-holds-barred ad campaign.
We had to do something drastic. We had to hit hard. We had to go after that 90% of the market. It was Nintendo.
What Nintendo? By 16.
Unfortunately, Genesis didn't do as well in America as Sega Japan had hoped.
Ultimately, we only did half a yuck when I was at Sega. We did 500,000 units.
Out went Michael Katz as president of Sega America, and in charged Tom Kalinske, an executive from Mattel.
I went back to a board meeting in Japan and I said, okay, we're doing things wrong. Our price is too high at $199. We have to take our price down. We're going to take Nintendo on head on. We're going to make fun of them in our advertising. We need to develop more software in the United States. We can't rely just on Japanese software. We have a title in our Genesis system called Altered Beast. It sounds like it's demon worship or something.
To Sega's stunned board of directors, Kalinsky's plan also sounded like the work of the devil.
And they said, well, we think you're completely wrong. This is not the right thing to do. And they all got up to leave. So I thought, well, this was an interesting 3-month career.
But then, at the very last moment, an angel appeared in the form of Sega CEO Hayao Nakayama.
And Hayao Nakayama turned at the door and said, okay, we brought you on to make these decisions, so we'll go ahead and agree with you, and you can do what you have just proposed.
Before long, Sega had a new hero. No, not Tom Kalinske, Sonic the Hedgehog.
One of the things we bragged about was how fast we could have action on our system, how fast we could move sprites around on the system. And so Sonic was designed to be a very fast-moving character.
And they just did very, very edgy ads.
Hey! You still don't have a Sega CD? What are you waiting for? Nintendo to make one?
The consumer was left with the impression that, you know, if you were cool, you used a Sega system, and if you were a 5-year-old kid, you used a Nintendo system.
All of a sudden, the share started going up, and we went from, you know, literally single-digit share to double-digit share to 20% share to 30% share.